Okay, so I've got a question for you. When you first met me, or when you first saw me on social media, or just heard my voice on this podcast or on any other podcast, what was your first assumption about me? Now, you might have heard my voice and thought, oh, goodness, that accent, very interesting. I wonder where that's from. Or you might have looked at me, looked at a picture of me, saw a video of me, and assumed something about my lifestyle, about what I like, about what I'm like, or maybe even what I'm into. Now, that's what today's conversation is all about. Today's episode of the Unlearners podcast is all about assumptions. Assumptions that we make, and we base so many of our decisions on just those assumptions. Now, assumptions are great, and we're going to talk about exactly what they are, how they happen, but we're also going to talk about how dangerous assumptions can actually be, and then how to escape that danger by being very careful about the assumptions you make, both in your personal life, but also in your professional life, so that you always become and stay the person who can learn, change, and grow while really holding space for other people to do the same. So, beautiful Unlearner, welcome to this episode of the Unlearners podcast. The Unlearners. Learn, change, the unlearn. I think if you take one courageous step at a time, it's going to be such a learn, change, grow. Welcome to this episode, and I am so excited to have a conversation about assumptions. Now, let's go right back to the question that I asked you right at the beginning in the introduction. When you saw me, when you heard me for the very first time, when you read work that I've done, maybe you read a Forbes article that I'd written, you made an assumption about me. And that's the truth. See, here's the thing. And most people, when I ask my clients this, they'll go, oh no, I didn't make an assumption. No way, Zanele. But you did. And that's the truth, because here's how assumptions work. We don't know everything, even though we might think we do sometimes, but we don't actually know everything. And because we don't know everything, we've got gaps. Literally, think about gaps in information as if there's a space there that nothing occupies it. We've got gaps in information and insight about so many things, including people, including information in our organizations, including things with regards to what to do in any given situation. So let's say you're in danger, you've got gap in information in terms of how to respond to that. So here's what happens in your brain when you have that gap. Your brain doesn't like uncertainty. Our brains don't like uncertainty. And you probably know that really, really well. But here's how the brain responds to that gap. When our brains notice that we've got this gap in information, this gap in insight, this gap in knowledge, our brains will cook up a beautiful assumption, presumption, supposition, you can call it the word that you prefer, but it literally cooks up this assumption. And where does this assumption come from? This assumption comes from previous experiences. It comes from your biases. It comes from your preferences. It comes from your deep-seated beliefs about who you are, about who other people are, and about other things, about what the world is as well. And if you listen to the podcast around unlearning, you'll really start to understand where some of those beliefs come from and what the process around unlearning is. But we literally call on those previous experiences, traumatic and otherwise, to make this assumption. Now, imagine you have just met someone new and you're looking at this person and you don't really know who they are. You have just met them, you're just shaking hands, and they give you a really firm handshake. Now, your brain is going to assume something about that handshake, but your brain is also going to assume something about that person based on how they are dressed. There's the sound of their voice, how deep their voice is. Is there a tone to their voice? Does their hair look well kempt or well groomed? What race is the person? What race do you think the person is? Do you think that the person is male, female, non-binary? What are the assumptions that you're making? And so your brain will literally try to fill in any gap that you have. And here's where the problem comes in. And this is probably the most important part of this conversation today. Is that the problem comes in when you take those assumptions and then you make a decision based on those assumptions. So you will say, oh, I think this person is definitely an accountant because of how they're dressed, or maybe they're carrying a calculator. That's a horrible example, but maybe they're carrying a calculator. So you're like, oh, they're definitely an accountant. They're dressed like this. They definitely work at a bank. You make that assumption and then you choose to start a conversation about something to do with something you read maybe in an accounting magazine or an economics newspaper. And you choose to just have that conversation based on an assumption that you made. That's the big problem. Assumptions are very normal, and they are the way that the brain finds its way around the world with limited information. You can't help it. We can't help it. I want you to just give yourself a little hug right now, because your assumptions are okay. They are how you function on this planet. They are how you survive and save yourself from being eaten in this world. They're okay. They're normal. They're natural. But like I said, the issue comes in when you base life-threatening, sometimes, decisions on assumptions, and you don't apply what we're going to talk about as step number 2. Now, that's the big idea behind assumptions, is that they're absolutely normal. We all make assumptions on a lot of things, and you will always make assumptions. Why? Because you will never. And I'm sorry if I'm bursting your bubble here, but you will never know everything. So assumptions are necessary for survival. Imagine having to know everything. Your brain would go absolutely crazy. Now, assumptions are really good for us, but the problem comes in when we use those assumptions to make decisions. So for example, if you just met that person and you decide that they're an accountant, and then you start that conversation about something you read in an economics magazine, only to find out that this person is actually a painter by profession, but they also do maybe playing the guitar at a nightclub in the evenings. You just made an assumption, started a conversation that put this person off because you made that assumption. Now you've lost an opportunity to connect with someone on a deeper level. You've lost an opportunity to form a relationship that could have possibly led to potential work in the future. Maybe this person could have hired your business to work with them. All sorts of things then get compromised as a result of you making an assumption and then not challenging it. So not putting yourself in a position where you were aware of your assumption. So let's talk then a little bit about what we do about that. So here's what to do instead. Now I want you to think about this. Think about when you are, and think about the last time that this happened to you. You were probably somewhere very randomly. You might have been walking on the roadside, or you may have just been on the train. You may have been in a taxi, whatever it was, and you saw something was happening in the corner of your eye. At first you didn't notice it. You sort of saw it. You're not too sure. And then you take another look. It's like that whole thing where you look and then you whoa, what? Did I just see what I think I saw? And then you look again. That's actually called a double glance. And a double glance is such a beautiful example for a concept that I call look and look again. Very similar to what Adam Grant talks about in his book, Think Again. Now, the way that I interpret that concept is as looking again. Because if you think about it, the first time that you look at something, you are just assuming. You look at it and you go, oh, that looks like it's a lily. And you look away. And then the second time you look, you are able to then double click into what you observed the very first time. Ask yourself the question of, is it what I thought I saw? Did I miss anything? Is something potentially misinterpreted in this situation? That's why when we think about assumptions, we can literally apply this 2-step framework that I teach consistently to my clients around how to be the person who is aware of your assumptions, but also become the person who challenges your assumptions. Because if we go out into the world consistently making decisions, taking actions, speaking words based on unchallenged assumptions, we will lose the opportunity to be the people who learn, change, and grow. And we will consistently be showing up as individuals who are not expanding their perspectives, but also are limited in how they view the world and don't open themselves up. So at any given time, it's be, do, have, not have, do, be. Most of us think that we have to have the things we need so that we can do the things that the ideal version of ourselves does, and then we'll be that person. But if you've ever been on a transformation or change journey, you will know that you actually have to embody that person. Ask yourself, what does that person do? Who are they?
And when you can embody that person, then you will do what that person does and have what that person has. Good news is that the unlearning experience, our 3-day transformation retreat, is designed for exactly that. If you know that you're dreaming about a version of yourself that's going to take the next level of performance, then this is an opportunity for you to unleash that version of yourself by taking stock of what might have been an amazing year, or also maybe not so much, and then planning strategically, intentionally, in a beautiful environment for the next year in a way that will allow you to be, then do, and then have. I'll see you at the unlearning experience.
Any given time, it's really important to apply those two things. So firstly, your awareness. How aware are you of the assumptions that you hold? To go right back to the beginning where we started, I want you to think about the assumptions that you made about me. Now, you may have made the assumption that, oh, Zanele, you've got short hair, your hair is cut nice and close to your scalp. Maybe it means that you are just really like a tough woman in your business, because there's so many assumptions around that. There are assumptions around women who wear their hair short. There are assumptions around women who wear flat shoes. There are assumptions around people who have teddy bears on their bed. There are all sorts of assumptions. And so if you go into your day-to-day life as a person who hasn't practiced a deep awareness, and it doesn't have to be super deep, but just practice some level of awareness, I want you to take a second where you are right now and just have a quick look around, and let's practice this. Let's get into the feeling of being aware of our assumptions. So just take a quick look around where you are at the moment. If you're in the car, please just be very careful. Just take a quick look around, and I would like you to just spot one thing in your surroundings. So where I am right now, I'm seeing a candle, because I literally have a candle on my desk that I burn every now and again when I am doing work, because I believe that I need to be mission-led, and a candle always invites me to remember my mission when I'm doing this work. Okay, sorry, that's a bit of a side note. Now, I want you, once you've identified that particular thing, to think about the assumptions that you make when you see that item, when you are presented with that item, when that item is in the hands or possession of another person. What assumptions do you instantly make when you see it? So I'll give you an example with my candle, and then I'd like you to think about your own. So when I think about the candle, assumptions that I make about people who have candles is that they are very scented. Another example that another assumption that I might make around candles is that they are associated with holiness and alignment and empowerment. I make the assumption that candles often smell nice. I might even make the assumption that if a candle is not lit, maybe it has been lit before. There's a whole bunch of different things that I might make, a bunch of different assumptions that I might make about just a candle all on its own. Now, here's the thing. Think about the assumptions that I've just made. Not all of them are true. Candles are not necessarily synonymous with holiness or synonymous with faith. Candles can be used in any setting at all. I mean, if you live in South Africa during the time of load shedding, you will know that candles are not synonymous with prayer or not synonymous with any kind of holy practice necessarily. And so it's an assumption that I make. Now, imagine me walking into someone's house and I see a whole bunch of candles and I just go, oh, this person must be so scented, must be so holy. It's an assumption. But it's an assumption that needs to be challenged, because if I start a conversation with that person around that topic on that assumption, I could offend them, but I could also make myself look like a person who hasn't opened my mind up to possibility. It's so dangerous to act on assumption that sometimes we don't actually realize it. So think about the thing that you are looking at. What are the assumptions that you make on a day-to-day about that particular thing? You could be looking at a car where you're from. You could be looking at someone of a perceived different race that's walking on the side of the road as you drive by. You could be looking at absolutely anything. It could just be the windscreen wipers on your car. And just think about the assumptions you make about that particular thing, and you will realize just how consistently we make those assumptions. But also what you'll realize is just how we don't challenge them. So step number one, just be aware of your assumptions. Take a look at them. Just be aware that they are there, but look at them with a sense of curiosity and interest. Like, oh wow, that's interesting. I wonder where that came from. I wonder when that started. When did I start believing that? Was it an experience that I had that led me to start assuming that, forming a particular belief around that? And just be interested in it without judgment. Because when we judge the assumptions, then it becomes that much harder to challenge them, because we start to dip into feelings of almost judging ourselves, but also we start to blame and we start to point fingers, where instead you just want to be curious, you just want to be interested. Almost take the position of an investigator who wants to find out and uncover. That way you open yourself up to possibility, and that's what you need. That's the kind of brain that learns best, is a brain that is curious rather than one that's judgmental and wants to put everything into boxes. So that's the first part. Just be curious. Once you know that there's an assumption there, double click into that thing and find out what's going on there, and just be interested in it. So that's the first thing, raise your awareness. And then the second thing, like we've spoken about, is the part where you then start to challenge and think about, what have I missed? What are the things I'm not seeing? Is there a possibility that this might actually be a flawed premise or a flawed assumption? Can I disprove this assumption? Is there something I'm not aware of that I could open myself up to in this instance? So let's go right back to the candle assumption and try this part out. So when I think about the candle assumption, if I challenge it, I might say, I've actually seen, I might call up examples that contradict what I think I assume or what I think I know to be true. So maybe I might have seen a candle being used in another way that is seemingly different from what I would have thought. Maybe I've seen a candle that burns differently. Maybe I've actually had enough experience with candles that don't necessarily have a pleasant scent. Whereas before, I'd assumed that it's either a candle is either neutral or has a beautiful, beautiful smell. But maybe they actually make candles that don't smell so great. Maybe like different scents, like maybe like a fart scent, or maybe like or just something different. And challenging my assumptions so that I'm consistently building the capacity to change my mind. That for me is the most important thing. When we challenge our assumptions, or we become the people who are always double clicking into what we thought was true, we become the people who can change their minds. You know, my business, The Unlearners, we are so mission driven, but one of our biggest ideals, or our mission, is really to create a world where it's okay to change your mind, because we haven't been trained to think that way. We've been trained to think that if you believed something yesterday, you need to stick to it, you need to die by it, it needs to just be the thing that you commit to for the rest of your life, or so help you. But otherwise, that's not the case anymore. The world is changing at an unprecedented rate, and the better we can be at becoming the people who can let go and grab hold of truths, of holy dogmas that we thought were, needed to be kept sacred, the better off we can be in terms of surviving as a species, but also being consistently relevant and sustainable. So it's so important that we become those people that can say, okay, one, I'm aware that there's an assumption here that I've made about candles. There's an assumption here that I've made about this information. There's an assumption I've made about this person. There's an assumption I've made about this brand, this company, that leader. Whatever it is, I've made an assumption, and that's okay. You can double click into it if you want, find out where it might be coming from, find out the feelings you have around it. And then as soon as you're aware, apply step number 2. Challenge yourself, push yourself to challenge that assumption and see what else you might be missing. Because unless we apply that step, then as organizations, we even miss out on smaller players in our market that could eat our lunch, or maybe just run us completely out of business, or just different things around how we can serve our customers and clients better, because we haven't challenged what we've always known to work really, really well in the marketplace. So there's so many different ways or elements or parts that could have this particular framework work beautifully. If you're sitting around a strategic conversation in your business, this is also a really great framework to apply. And if you'd like someone to facilitate it, Look and Look Again is my framework that I use consistently with organizations. And I'm happy to facilitate an entire workshop where we think about whether it's your human resources function, your learning and development, R&D, whatever it is. And we sit and we go, okay, what are the assumptions we're making about our clients, about our customers, about our market share, all of those things. And then how do we challenge those? What does that look like? And that turns into a beautiful strategic conversation or a strategy session that I can facilitate with your organization. That was a shameless plug. I'm just putting in there because I know how helpful this framework has been to so many organizations. And I'm talking large organizations that are part of the Fortune 500 that I've supported just using deeper principles that come from these two very valuable insights that I've shared with you. Just look and look again. So it would be a pleasure to support you by digging deep into some of these, giving you really great organizational examples, and then facilitating how you and your team look and look again. So I will close that right there because I like to think, and my parents often say you wanna stop when things are still really, really juicy, really, really good. So I'm going to stop right there because the conversation around assumptions could go so far. But I think when we understand that we have to apply our awareness and then challenge our assumptions, then we have got a beautiful framework that will set us up to be the kind of people, the kind of organizations, and the kind of society that learns, changes, and grows. Okay, my beautiful, beautiful unlearner, that is the end of this week's episode of the Unlearners podcast. I hope you found it valuable. Please, please, please reach out to our team. Let us know how you found this episode. Rate, review the podcast so we know exactly what tickles your fancy, what you enjoy listening to, and any suggestions you have of conversations. I would love to do more Q&A episodes where I just answer questions that you've asked around your unlearning journey. So let me know what some of those are, and I would be absolutely thrilled to support you on this journey. For now, though, it's been myself, Zanele Njapa, the Unlearning Lady, and for now, I am saying goodbye and all the best on your unlearning journey. I will see you on the next episode of the Unlearners podcast. The Unlearners. Learn, change, the unlearn. I think if you take one courageous step at a time, it's going to be such the unlearn. Learn, change, grow.